Ideally, today's lecture will be somewhat short. I'm shooting for about 30 minutes. Might make that, might not. All right, so today's lecture I meant to start a week ago, and unfortunately I overwrote. Actually, I guess I misnamed one of the slideshow presentations. And so instead of trying to go back and try and find that, we just went ahead and did the systems thinking slides. All right, so in the overall scheme of things, not a big deal, but it did kind of disrupt the flow just a little bit, but we'll move on, overcome that. So what we're going to start today is we're going to talk about cross-functional process maps. Before we do that, obviously we're going to do a quick review of context diagram. All right, everybody should have a good solid hand on the context diagram because I've talked about it umpteen times. All right, if you don't, all right, then you need to see me after class and we'll figure out what we can do to get you where you need to be. We will not start flowcharts today. That'll be for next week. All right, so again, why do we need to learn these? And this kind of is superseded by the slides that we just went through this week in the systems thinking. See the big picture, see what goes in and out of a system, need to be able to describe all the transformative activities that convert the inputs to outputs. Wow. All right. So let's go back. All right. So I told you that you will see this slide multiple times and that you should memorize this slide. All right. That still stands. So we're going to do a real quick review on the context diagram. All right. And then we're going to talk about the cross-functional process chart, or otherwise known as the swim lane diagram. All right. And so as we're talking about this, when we start looking at a system, that context diagram, we're looking at the big thing, right? We're looking at its environment. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually step inside that environment and we're going to start looking at how things flow through a system. Okay, and we're going to break that down and do all that good stuff so that you can understand the processes that are going on and what the logical flow is of those processes. All right. Next thing that we'll do is we'll go through the flow chart. That'll be next week. All right. And the flow chart actually, describes the things that are happening. It involves decision making, matrices, the whole 9 yards. Okay. So what we're doing is we're going from this great big, we're stepping down, and then we're stepping down, and then the last thing we'll talk about is the state diagram, which is we're looking at one little thing. All right, so everybody gets that. Starting at the big, narrowing our focus down, narrowing our focus down, narrowing our focus down. All right, key elements to remember. All right, so the context diagram, there is a specific way that we draw this, right? In that the system itself is in the circle. All right. There's nothing inside that system. We're just looking at the system as a whole. We're not looking at any functions or processes or anything. All right. And then we have external entities that provide inputs and receive outputs from our system. All right, which are designated by the little arrows. All right. We might have a quiz at the end of class today. Maybe. See how much time I have. Okay, so cross-functional process maps. So what we're looking at is business functions. And so we'll use the restaurant and we'll actually go through and we'll break down some possible cross-function process maps for a restaurant. And again, the reason that we use that is that everybody has experience with a restaurant. Probably better than half of you have worked in a restaurant at some point in time. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to break things down by business function. And we've already kind of talked about this a little bit in that when I come up to place an order, right, we have a front counter. All right, and so there is where I place my order. So that would be kind of a business function in that order taking. All right, what would be another business function? Well, we could say the kitchen. All right, that's a business function. Depending on how I wanted to look at it, I could break that kitchen down into hamburgers, fries, drinks. Okay, I could, depending on what I wanted to do. All right. And then all that stuff is made, there's another thing that's called expediting, right? So these are the people that pick up the parts of the order and hand it off to the customer. All right. So business functions, we are looking at functional areas. All right. So these functional areas will be listed on the left-hand side of our swim lane process chart or cross-functional process mark. All right. So we have, and you'll see this in just a second, business functions. All right. And then over here, we're going to talk about the things that are actually going on. Actions and processes. Or it should be processes and actions. Okay. All right, so, and this will make a little more sense once we get into the slides. We're going to define the boundaries. All right. And so this is the one that when a week ago when I first started this on Monday, I said, you know, this is not going to make a whole lot of sense the first time you look at it. All right, you're going to look at it and you're going to be like, wait a minute, I don't really understand. All right, first time I went through these slides, I was like, what? Okay, it'll make sense as we go through. But we are going to determine the boundaries, all right, to focus in on the things that we want to look at. So as we go through the slides, hopefully that will become a little more evident. Okay, so we'll fill in the swim lane, right? So we got our business function over here, and then we got processes and activities going on here. All right, and activities produce outputs by converting or changing inputs. All right. Do not show detail within the activity. All right. So what they're saying is that we don't want to make this so complex that it's useless. All right. So back on, I don't remember which lecture it was, I threw up the counterinsurgency little sheet that had all the stuff everywhere, right? Too much detail, all right? We want to give enough detail so that people can understand the logical responsibility for a business area, the processes that are going on in there, and even the flow of stuff through those processes, right? But we don't want to create extra detail, all right? And then break up functional activities into smaller ones if there's an intermediate step performed by other functions. All right. So again, we're trying to give enough detail so that people can understand what's going on there in the flow of stuff through the processes. Okay, we're going to use inputs and outputs, arrows to show direction, labels, all right, and then the medium. All right. And the medium doesn't apply to everything, okay? And that'll make more sense here in a minute. But if we're talking about the order process itself, where somebody comes up and says, hey, I'd like a Big Mac, all right? So what's the medium of that? It's voice communication, right? Now, they take your order and they do what to it? They put it into the point of sale system. Okay, that becomes an electronic medium. All right. Maybe back on the fry side, they have a printout that says, hey, I need 16 large fries to go with this order. All right, then the medium would be a printout. Does that make sense to everybody? But not everything is going to have the medium. All right. There are some things that there's only one medium. So if we look at the process of making hamburgers, right, there's only one medium. All right, we throw it on the grill and we do our thing. The arrows show logical flow, but not physical. All right, so we're going to draw this cross-functional process map or swim lane, and again, those terms are synonymous. They are one and the same. If I say cross-functional process map or I say swim lane diagram, they're the same thing. All right, it shows logical flow, but not necessarily the physical flow through. And so as I pull these up, I'll point that out again. But again, this just shows the logical flow, not the actual flow. If it shows on here that it's moving to the right, it doesn't necessarily mean that's what direction it's going. That's just the logical flow through that function. All right. as we draw this, we want to check to make sure that we're including everything that has to be there. Does each activity have at least one input and one output? All right, so if I've got an activity, make hamburgers, right? And then we show it going off to the expediter, all right, there's something missing there. Where did the hamburgers come from? All right, they didn't just magically appear, they came from somewhere. Where did they come from? All right, so when we go back through, we want to look at, is there at least one? There has to be an input and an output. All right. Is the activity a verb? If it's not, then it's probably not an activity, it's something else. Are the inputs and outputs named? And does each activity have all the inputs needed to produce the outputs? Okay, so if I actually go through, does it adequately show all the things that go into it to create this thing that we're doing? All right, so here's our first blush at the cross-functional process map. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show is that we have established boundaries. Okay, so we have a boundary here, and then we have a boundary here. All right, does anybody notice anything weird about this boundary though? Why does that boundary go up and include fill cups? Anybody know? Yes, sir.
Because they might give the cups to the customer and then the customer fills them, but
Right.
it's still their sale.
The customer actually becomes a part of this, all right? And so the boundary goes up to include this, but the customer is actually part of that process, all right? And so that's why we're up here in customer, all right? And we're showing the fill cups there because they are part of the process. All right, so let's talk about what is here, all right? And if we look at this, there are some errors in this, all right? But again, this is just the first blush at it, and if I were going to go in and do a cross-functional process map or a swim lane diagram of a restaurant, I would probably start off with something very much like this, okay? Because I'm just putting things down and I'm getting an idea of the flow, all right? That's how we start. But then we're going to go back and we're going to do all those checks that we talked about. You know, we're going to look at each one of these things. Like here we have the make sandwiches. Where do the sandwiches come from? All right, there's a stockroom down here somewhere, all right, that's got stuff coming in so that we can make sandwiches. They didn't just magically appear. All right, so that's how we do it, is we start, we get an idea of what it is, and then we start going back through it and we start processing through this and saying, yeah, does this adequately represent what actually happens? So here we have what? The verbal order. Hey, I'd like a Big Mac. Or a Whopper, or in my case, I'm going to go get the spicy chicken filet at Chick-fil-A. You're going to hear me talk about that a lot because it's my favorite sandwich of all time. The verbal price, that'll be $17.25, which is pretty close over here. They're really expensive. Yeah, I don't get the discount price like you did because I refuse to keep putting money on a car. It's just, I'm not doing that. I don't like doing it. All right, so they're going to say, okay, the price is this. And then we're going to make some form of payment, all right? And then what? We get receipt and change. All right, so that seems more or less there. So sales, okay, this is our area, our functional area. We have kitchen, which is a functional area, and then we have the assembly, which is a functional area. Now I talked about earlier, I could break this down into burger prep, fry prep, whatever, right? And that would not be wrong, all right? But if I first started doing this, I might draw it like this just to get an idea, an adequate, a starting representation of what to work with, all right? So now we have an electronic order that goes back here to the kitchen, right? Where we have this process called make sandwiches, all right? Then the make sandwiches does what? It goes to this expediter, and that's probably what this probably should be called, is expedition. All right. They're bagging and traying food, and off it goes to the customer. Okay. So this gives us a starting point. It gives us something to start working with. It's not complete. It's far from complete. So what is missing? Besides the thing that I already said, that the sandwich didn't magically appear. What else is missing? We're going to Chick-fil-A. Who went to Chick-fil-A today? Lucky guys. I didn't get to go to Chick-fil-A today. So if you're ordering Chick-fil-A, what are you going to get?
A sandwich.
And?
Fries.
Do you see fries up there? There's no fries. This is a problem. All right, so we got to add the fries in there, right? All right, and do note that we took away all the labels so that we can actually talk about other things. In reality, they would be there. All right, we already talked about this. The sandwiches are basically just being poofed. Whoop, they're there. All right, where do these come from? There's probably an intermediate storage area here, and then there's also back here outside the boundaries we'll have what? A stockroom. All right. Why isn't the stockroom on here? There are probably several reasons why it's not on there, but what are some reasons why I wouldn't have the stockroom on here?
It makes everything more complicated.
Okay. How so?
There's more things. So
Okay.
it's harder to read and understand.
Okay, you're getting there.
It's not immediately involved in the system.
Right. Okay, so for this, really what I want to focus on is what actually happens inside of here, okay? I'm not really concerned about what's going on here. I might become concerned about that. I might want to take a closer look at that. And if I did, what would I do? I'd shift my boundaries. And if I wanted to look solely at the stockroom, I could actually shift the boundaries down here and down to the stockroom. And then I could examine all of the functionalities that happen within the stockroom, right? All right. It just depends on what it is that I want to do, what it is that I want to discover, what I want to find. All right, so here we go. We're talking about, now we threw in the stockroom, but it's still outside the boundary. Okay, but we've got this input, raw food and supplies. All right. And again, this is really generic. All right, because for the purpose of what we're doing, we don't need to know that, there's hamburger patties, there's Whopper patties, there's chicken patties, there's fish patties. We don't need to know all that. We just need to know that back here we have the stockroom that houses all these raw materials, and they come in here to this process, make sandwiches. All right. And here's another one. Okay, so we've got fill cups, right? Well, we still have to do what? From time to time, our Brinks machine runs out of syrup. And so we have to have that filled. We run out of ice. A lot of times when you go to the restaurant, they're out, especially over there, they're out of ice all the time. I don't know why. One of you should go talk to them and say, hey, look, Dr. Dowser said, don't do that because then they'll ban me. All right. So here we are, and again, we've got this nebulous region down here, and we're saying, yep, soda and ice comes from here and goes out there. All right. Is there anybody that's kind of like, I'm not really getting this? Everybody pretty firm on what's going on? Okay, good. Let's see. All right, we already talked about the missing fry station. Okay. So again, when we start putting these together, all right, I just want to get major functional areas. I want to get those identified. All right. I can refine this later, but I've got to start putting stuff down. And then once I start working through it and I say, okay, what all creates this make sandwiches? You know, what all is involved in that make sandwiches? All right. Well, we've got to have the raw materials, which we now show. All right. And then the sandwiches go out here to the assembly or expedite. Good grief. Expedite. That's what it's called. Expedite. That's what we're calling it from now on. Expedite. All right. And then it goes on out to the customer. All right. But we have to step through this, and we have to ask those critical questions so that we get a real understanding of what's going on. All right. So here we go. We're starting to add that detail back in. So when we added the make fries, what happened here? Well, we've got another, all right, and it's showing an order, but what's it missing? The medium, right? Why do I care about the medium?
Explains the how.
Okay. Well, why do I care?
Your employee needs to know how they're going to get their instructions.
Okay. Yeah.
Record keeping.
Okay. Also, the stock room, right? If this is a printer that's printing stuff out, what else do we have? We got a stock room that has what? Paper. Or whatever they're using to do that, right? That's another little piece of the puzzle that we need to understand. All right. Also, if I come in here and I look and I say, okay, how can I save money out of this process? All right. So if I walked in and I'm looking at this, anywhere that they have a paper trail, a paper transaction, is a place they can save money. Why?
It can be digitized, and you don't have to buy paper.
Right. If we digitize it, if we go to a monitor, then we don't have that paper cost. And if you don't think paper is expensive, it really is. The paper cups that you buy when you get your drink are the biggest cost out of that drink. All right. A drink at a restaurant is about 800% profit. All right. And the biggest expense of that is the cup, which is about a nickel a piece. All right. So they get expensive really fast. All right. So paper products are really expensive. So again, what are we trying to do? What are we looking for? This gives us an understanding of how everything works, what the logical flow is, and then the things that are used to go through that flow. Okay. All right, and again, this is us going through the checks. All right. Are we actually labeling things? A lot of the labels got left off this one, right? All right. All the inputs required to produce the required output. Again, we don't have stuff magically poofing into existence. Okay. And I already kind of talked about this. These boundaries, we set them. All right. And again, it's dependent upon what it is that we're trying to do, what it is that we're trying to focus our attention on. All right. And we can shift those however we want. All right. But again, it depends on what it is that we're trying to do. And I already talked about this in one of the previous slides. You know, the customer actually is part of this. As they're filling their own cups, they become part of the order fulfillment process. All right, and that's why it delves into the customer. All right, so here's another look. And so this one's starting to get a little bit more convoluted, okay? We want to be careful that we don't throw too much detail in here. We want to get enough to adequately represent what's going on, but we don't want so much detail that we can't read it, that we can't make use of it. All right. So we can see clearly the functional areas. We can see how each function contributes to the overall system. What do they do for the system? How is the system reliant upon those functional areas and the processes that happen within those functional areas? And then we can see the sequencing of steps, how things move through here. And again, like I said, this is a logical flow, not necessarily the physical flow. So we have the inner order here, and it goes to here, it fries over there. Well, the fry station may be way over there, or it might be way in the back. All right, this is logical, not physical. This does not adequately represent the physical restaurant itself. Okay, this is a logical sequencing. And then, of course, we can see our outputs and inputs, and we can ask those questions. Do we have everything that's required to make the end product? Okay, cross-functional map doesn't solve problems. It doesn't solve problems, okay? What it does is it helps us to identify problems, okay? And so we can look at, okay, what are all the things that feed into a particular thing, all right? And again, this is a universal language, okay? You don't have to speak English to understand what this is. All right, universal language so that people from different areas can communicate and get the same conclusion from the document. All right, so on this one, we got, and this is for, what is this, some type of construction area, something or other, yeah. Customer sales, engineering, manufacturing. So, inner order, prepare spec, make preliminary drawings, prepare design package, do final design. All right, so this one doesn't necessarily need to be there because it's just feeding into its own thing. So this needs to be here because what? It's going back out to the customer for a review. This one needs to be here because it comes in to the inner spec. This one just feeds itself, and so this one's kind of redundant. We don't necessarily need this in here. It's just extraneous detail. All right. This one needs to be done because what? We've got the customer says, yep, I want that, and then we output. Okay. How many people are feeling like, whoa, there's a lot of information? Raise your hand. Okay. It is. Going once around the world with these is a lot. Right? So you should go back in at the very minimum and look at the PowerPoint. I will have the video posted up. It'll probably be Monday before I get the video posted up. I might get it this weekend, but I kind of doubt it. All right. The next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about flowcharts. All right. And then from there we'll talk about the state diagram. And then the next thing we'll do is we'll talk about some of the pioneers of systems thinking. All right. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
This pertains to the homework. Is it all right if I ask that?
Say that again.
Pertains to the homework. Is it all right if I ask that, or would you?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're having this brainstorm. It looks like for something like this, and so one of the questions has come up with verb object form.
Are you talking about the Fermi stuff?
This is systems modeling context diagrams. What's the homework for that? Sorry. I was just wondering if like make fries and like that type of thing. Just what
no,
you're
this
doing.
is, so this is for a context diagram. So this is beyond this, all right? So that assignment was made a week ago, actually a little over a week ago. I just gave you extended time because we had some stuff going on.
Gotcha. Okay.
So do it for the context diagram. You don't necessarily have to do all of this because you just learned this.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? All right. Have a good weekend. Be safe.